6 a.m. Saturday morning, I step outside to milk my cows, and there's a full wedding ceremony happening in my pasture. 200 guests, white tent, DJ blasting music. On land my family's owned since 1891. The bride's mother storms over, designer heels sinking into fresh cow manure, screaming, "You need to leave immediately. This is private property. Lady, it's my private property." Meet Delilah Penworth, HOA president and professional pain in the ass, who somehow convinced 200 people my cattle ranch was her daughter's wedding venue. 15 grand worth of organic tomatoes trampled. My prize Holstein spooked into the next county. The sweet stench of crushed heirloom varieties mixing with expensive perfume and pure panic. But here's the thing about us Morrison men. We don't back down from bullies. And when that diesel manure spreader fired up in front of all her fancy guests, well, let's just say some people learned what organic farming really smells like. What would you do? Fight back or fold? Where are you watching from? Drop your state below. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. My name's Jake Morrison, and I'm the 4th generation to work this land. Morrison Ranch, 127 acres of prime cattle country that my great-grandfather Silas carved out of nothing back in 1891. The creak of the old kitchen table where 4 generations planned their harvests. The sweet scent of alfalfa hay stored in barns built by hand. This wasn't just property, it was legacy. When my dad had his heart attack in 2019, I inherited more than just the land. I got a $340,000 farm debt that felt like a noose around my neck. Dad was old school, handshake deals, cash payments, and a filing system that consisted of shoving receipts into coffee cans. The banks weren't exactly throwing confetti when I walked in looking like I'd been wrestling cattle, which, to be fair, I had. But here's where it gets interesting. In 2021, I made the smartest decision of my life. Went organic. Not because I'm some tree-hugging hippie, but because those fancy restaurants in the city pay premium prices for heirloom tomatoes that haven't been doused in chemicals. Last year alone, I pulled in enough profit to actually sleep at night instead of lying awake calculating feed costs. Even after my ex-wife decided she couldn't handle the isolation and moved back to the city with half my savings, I knew this land was worth fighting for. The smooth texture of newborn calf fur during spring births, the satisfying weight of a perfectly ripe tomato, some things you can't put a price on. Then came 2020, and everything changed. Some developer with more money than sense bought up the farmland next to mine, 300 acres of good soil that the Henderson family had worked for 60 years. By 2022, it was Willowbrook Estates, 200 McMansions ranging from $800,000 to $1.2 million. HOA fees alone were $450 a month, which is more than I spend on groceries for 3 months. The new neighbors moved in expecting suburban convenience with a side of rural charm. You know the type. They want the Instagram-worthy sunset views but file noise complaints when the rooster crows at 5 a.m. Enter Delilah Penworth, age 48, former corporate lawyer turned professional suburban dictator. Her husband owns a chain of urgent care clinics, and they dropped $1.1 million on the biggest house specifically for its commanding view of pastoral landscape. Translation, they paid extra to stare at my cows while sipping wine and complaining about agricultural odors. Delilah's daughter Brittany was getting married, an $85,000 Pinterest-perfect extravaganza with a rustic farm theme. Because apparently spending more than most people's annual salary to cosplay as farmers is peak sophistication. The first shot fired came 3 months before the wedding. Delilah marched onto my property wearing a business suit and carrying a clipboard like she was conducting an inspection. She claimed my fence line encroached 3 feet onto HOA common area, producing some dusty 1987 survey that predated her subdivision by 35 years. "This is completely unacceptable," she announced, standing next to fence posts my father installed by hand. "You'll need to correct this error immediately, at your own expense, of course." $12,000 for new fencing. Just like that. The way she said of course with that little head tilt, like explaining basic manners to a particularly slow child. I was exhausted from harvest season, drowning in paperwork, and frankly too tired to fight. The sound of my grandfather's cowbell hanging on the porch seemed to mock me as I signed the agreement. You give a bully an inch, they'll take your whole damn farm. 3 weeks before the wedding, Delilah returned. This time, she wasn't asking, she was informing me. Apparently, she'd mentioned using my pasture for the ceremony and was graciously offering me $500 for the inconvenience. Peak tomato harvest, cattle breeding season, and she wanted to parade 200 people through my operation like it was Disneyland. Ma'am, I'm going to have to decline. The mask slipped. The fake smile vanished. This woman who'd been playing suburban socialite for months looked me dead in the eye and said, "We'll see about that." That's when I knew this wasn't about a wedding. This was war. 3 days after Delilah's "we'll see about that" threat, she was back. This time she brought backup, a folder full of papers and the kind of confident smile that usually means someone's about to get screwed. "Jake," she called out, waving like we were old friends, "I'm so glad I caught you. I wanted to finalize the details for Brittany's wedding. I was knee-deep in my tomato greenhouse, the sweet green smell of tomato leaves on my hands when this conversation started. That scent would forever remind me of the moment my peaceful farming life officially ended. "Ma'am, I told you no." "Oh, that was just a misunderstanding." She laughed like I'd told a hilarious joke. "I've already put down a $500 deposit for the rental fee. It's all arranged." She pulled out a contract she'd apparently written herself, complete with my property description and a date I'd never agreed to. According to Delilah's version of reality, I'd agreed to provide pastoral venue space for 180 guests, including barn access for photos. The kicker? A clause about establishing community use precedent for future events. The crunch of gravel under her designer sneakers as she shifted impatiently told me everything I needed to know. This woman was used to getting her way. When I refused again, her mask slipped faster than paint off a barn in July heat. "Fine. We'll see how cooperative you feel after tonight's emergency HOA meeting." That evening, my neighbor Earl called. "Jake, you better get down to the community center. That woman's cooking something, and it ain't Sunday dinner." I walked into that meeting and found 30 neighbors watching Delilah's PowerPoint presentation about agricultural nuisances affecting property values. She had photos of my manure pile, completely legal composting, labeled as unsanitary conditions. Pictures of field mice near my grain storage were presented as evidence of rodent infestation. "We need to petition for a mandatory manure management system," she announced. $25,000 should cover proper equipment for problems that didn't exist. But here's where my dad's old advice kicked in. When someone's trying to steal your land, son, you better know the law better than they do. I spent that night researching, and by morning, I'd called the county clerk. "Oh yes, the Penworth complaint," the clerk said. "She filed a property line dispute last month, claiming adverse possession rights." My blood ran cold. I remembered reading about this in farm magazines. People lose family land because they don't understand that adverse possession requires continuous use for over 10 years in most states. You document everything with photos and dates because these cases live or die on evidence. Delilah was trying to establish legal precedent that my property was somehow community accessible. But she'd made one crucial mistake, filing paperwork before actually using the land, creating a paper trail of her real intentions. Time for my counterpunch. I called Gus Hendrickson, my father's old lawyer. At 67, Gus had been fighting for farmers since before Delilah learned to spell litigation. "Son, you're dealing with a land grab dressed up as community service," he told me over coffee. "But we've got right to farm laws in this county." This was my ace in the hole. Dad had mentioned these laws during his final years, protection that shields established agricultural operations from nuisance complaints. If your farm predates the complainant's residence by even 1 day, you're usually protected. Morrison Ranch, 1891. Willowbrook Estates, 2020. Math doesn't lie. But Delilah escalated to bureaucratic warfare. Anonymous complaints flooded the county health department about unsanitary conditions and groundwater contamination. A surprise inspection was scheduled for the worst possible time, cattle birthing season. The inspector arrived with a clipboard and an attitude, clearly coached on what to look for. He nitpicked everything. Loose gate latch, faded organic certification poster, manure storage that was perfectly compliant but looked disorganized. 30 days to address these deficiencies, he said, writing violations that would cost thousands. That's when my research skills paid off again. A little digging revealed this inspector's brother-in-law had recently bought a house in Willowbrook Estates. I'd learned from Farm Bureau meetings that filing ethics complaints against public officials for conflicts of interest costs nothing and creates an official paper trail. Most people don't know this option exists, but it's devastatingly effective. The metallic taste of anger was becoming familiar, but so was the sweet satisfaction of fighting back with facts instead of feelings. By week's end, I'd filed the ethics complaint and contacted the state agricultural ombudsman. My counterpunch landed harder than Delilah expected. The inspector was suspended pending investigation, and suddenly those urgent violations didn't seem so urgent anymore. But I could smell trouble brewing like a storm on the horizon. This was just round one, and Delilah Penworth didn't strike me as someone who gave up easy. The war for Morrison Ranch had officially begun. After my ethics complaint got her inspector buddy suspended, Delilah went nuclear. If she couldn't use corrupt officials, she'd manufacture a crisis that would force legitimate ones to shut me down. The social media campaign started like a suburban housewife's fever dream. She created concerned Willowbrook residents on Facebook and began posting photos of my farm with captions that would make a tabloid editor blush. My manure pile, standard composting that every farm needs, became toxic waste threatening our children's health. Field mice near grain storage transformed into disease-carrying rodents invading our neighborhood. The sharp smell of my morning coffee turned bitter when I saw her posts getting dozens of shares. These people actually believed that an organic farm was more dangerous than the chemical cocktails they sprayed on their lawns every weekend. You can't make this stuff up. But Delilah's masterstroke was pure evil genius. She posted grainy photos claiming to show contaminated runoff from my property, water that was cleaner than what flowed from most city taps. Her caption read, "Chemicals seeping into our groundwater. How long before our property values plummet?" The irony was thicker than molasses in January. My organic operation used 0 chemicals, while her neighbors dumped enough herbicides to kill everything except their mortgage payments. Within 48 hours, 30 signatures demanded immediate county intervention. This time, they couldn't ignore it. Too many concerned citizens screaming about imaginary health threats. Inspector Williams arrived Tuesday morning, right when I was helping my Holstein deliver her first calf. Nothing like dealing with bureaucrats while elbow-deep in birthing a 1,000-pound animal. The rich, earthy scent of properly composted manure filled the air, a smell any real farmer recognizes as healthy soil biology, not contamination. Williams seemed legitimate, unlike his suspended colleague. He took water samples, photographed composting areas, checked organic certification docs. Everything was textbook perfect, and we both knew it. Then he got creative. "This gate latch seems loose," he noted, wiggling perfectly functional hardware. "Your certification poster has sun fading," he added, squinting at completely legible documentation. The manure storage, while compliant, could be considered visually disorganized. Each nitpick was technically true but practically meaningless, like getting a speeding ticket for 36 in a 35 zone. Legal harassment disguised as law enforcement. While Williams documented his trivial violations, I was documenting him. Sometimes being underestimated is an advantage. That evening's research would have made Dad proud. Phone calls to other farmers revealed Williams had conducted similar surprise inspections on 3 agricultural operations, all neighbors of new developments, all resulting in expensive compliance orders. But here's where my detective work paid off. Property records showed Williams owned a modest house across town, but recent tax documents revealed he'd purchased a lot in Willowbrook Estates Phase 2. Construction scheduled after his current home sold. The pieces clicked together like a John Deere firing on all cylinders. Williams wasn't just doing his job. He had financial skin in the game. Rising property values in Willowbrook meant bigger profits on his future home sale. And farms don't exactly scream premium neighborhood to suburban buyers. I'd learned about regulatory capture from farm magazines, when government officials serve private interests instead of public ones. The Farm Bureau had resources I'd never known existed, including a hotline for farmers dealing with suspicious inspections. Who knew? By Thursday morning, I'd filed complaints with the state agricultural ombudsman and sent Williams's property records to the county ethics board. Sometimes the best defense is proving your opponents aren't as smart as they think. The response was swift and beautiful. Williams got reassigned to desk duties pending investigation, and my urgent violations quietly disappeared. Funny how corruption wilts under sunlight. But Delilah escalated to economic warfare. Local restaurants started receiving anonymous calls about contaminated produce from Morrison Ranch. Someone claimed my organic vegetables caused food poisoning, completely fabricated but potentially devastating. The acrid taste of panic hit when Giuseppe from Romano's called to temporarily suspend his heirloom tomato orders. 2 more restaurants followed within days. This wasn't about wedding venues anymore. This was systematic destruction of my livelihood until selling to developers became my only option. Time for my nuclear counterpunch. I called every restaurant owner personally, explaining the harassment campaign and offering free soil testing results. Then I contacted the health department directly, demanding investigation of false food poisoning reports. Filing false health complaints is a felony, something Delilah apparently didn't know. The state health inspector arrived Friday afternoon, not to investigate my farm, but to interview restaurant owners about the anonymous calls. Within hours, they'd traced the calls back to a burner phone purchased at the Walmart near Willowbrook Estates. Saturday morning brought the sweetest sound I'd heard in weeks. Delilah's voice on my voicemail, stammering about misunderstandings and offering to clear the air. Too little, too late, lady. The gloves were officially off. Monday morning brought the full cavalry. Delilah arrived with her daughter Brittany, a wedding planner who looked like she'd rather be performing root canals, and some lawyer in a $1,000 suit who kept checking his Rolex like he charged by the nanosecond. I was fixing a waterline break near my greenhouse when this parade of entitlement rolled up my gravel driveway. The satisfying weight of my pipe wrench in my hands felt like the last normal moment before everything went completely insane. "Jake!" Delilah called out, all fake cheer and barely contained hysteria. "We need to discuss our arrangement." Brittany stepped forward, mascara already running despite it being 9 a.m. Sweet kid, probably 25, caught between her mother's delusions and reality's brutal truth. "Mr. Morrison, I'm so sorry to bother you," she sniffled. "But Mom says we have a verbal agreement for the wedding, and I've already sent invitations to 180 people telling them about the beautiful farm ceremony." The lawyer cleared his throat with the kind of authority that comes from billing more per hour than most people make in a week. "Mr. Morrison, my client has documentation of your verbal commitment to provide venue services. Failure to honor this agreement constitutes actionable breach of contract." I set down my wrench and wiped my hands on a rag that had survived 3 decades of farm work. The smell of fresh-turned earth from my morning cultivation mixed with enough expensive perfume to stock a department store. "Counselor, I never agreed to squat. Your client here has been making my life hell for months, and now she's straight up lying about imaginary contracts." Delilah's transformation from suburban soccer mom to corporate shark happened faster than a barn cat on a field mouse. "What kind of heartless man ruins a young woman's special day? We're offering more than fair compensation." $85,000 in unrecoverable wedding costs, the lawyer added, brandishing papers like they were nuclear launch codes. "Reception deposits, catering contracts, photographer bookings, all contingent on this specific venue." Brittany looked like someone had just explained that Santa Claus was actually her creepy Uncle Larry. "Mom, you said he already agreed. You showed me the signed contract last week." The silence stretched longer than a Sunday sermon in July heat. Even Mr. $400 shifted uncomfortably, apparently realizing his client might have been economical with the truth. "There's been a communication misunderstanding," Delilah said with the smoothness of a used car salesman. "Jake, we need your final decision by Friday, or we'll be forced to pursue all available legal remedies." After they left in a cloud of desperation and diesel exhaust, I called Gus with hands that shook from pure, concentrated fury. "Son, they're bluffing harder than a poker player with a pair of twos," he said after I described the ultimatum. "But let me dig into this Delilah character. Something about her whole operation stinks worse than a catfish farm in August." Gus's detective work would have impressed the FBI. By Wednesday, he'd uncovered connections that made my head spin like a carnival ride. "Jake, you better sit down for this," he said, spreading documents across my kitchen table like evidence at a war crimes trial. "Your HOA president isn't just some bored housewife with too much time. She's got corporate law background and financial ties to Pinnacle Development Group." The picture emerged clearer than morning frost on a windshield. Delilah had orchestrated this exact scenario before, systematically harassing property owners near new developments until they sold out of pure exhaustion. 2 farms in neighboring counties had already fallen to similar campaigns. "Her husband's medical practice is mortgaged deeper than a strip mine," Gus continued. $2.3 million in loans from Pinnacle Development Group. Balloon payment comes due this December. The math was simple and brutal. Morrison Ranch represented prime development real estate, highway access, established water rights, perfect topography for subdivision. Developer estimated value, $3.2 million. My remaining mortgage, $340,000. They don't just want your land, son. They need it. Delilah gets her finder's fee, hubby's debt disappears, and Pinnacle makes millions building trophy homes where your great-grandfather planted his first crops. The wedding wasn't about young love. It was corporate espionage disguised as celebration. 180 guests trampling my property would create photographic evidence for future eminent domain proceedings. Established community access, they'd argue, pointing to social media photos of guests enjoying my underutilized agricultural land. Thursday brought harassment that made previous efforts look like gentle suggestions. HOA members conducted property line surveys with measuring tapes and attitudes. Anonymous complaints flooded every government agency with jurisdiction over anything remotely farm-related. Delilah's desperation was showing like roots on a bad dye job. Friday evening, she made her final play. Standing on my porch as sunset painted everything the color of blood, she dropped all pretense. "The wedding happens Saturday morning, with or without your permission," she said, voice colder than a well-digger's belt buckle. "I've told 180 guests about their charming farm ceremony. Try stopping us, and your organic certification becomes history." Her smile could have carved ice. "Guest photos start at 8 a.m., ceremony at 2 p.m. Interfere, and you'll never sell another vegetable in this county." Time to remind this corporate vulture what 4 generations of Morrison determination looked like. Friday night, while Delilah was probably practicing her mother-of-the-bride smile in the mirror, Gus called with news that would flip this whole war upside down. "Jake, drop whatever you're doing and get over here. I found something that'll knock your boots clean off." I found him in his cluttered home office, looking like a detective who'd just cracked the case of the century. Documents covered every surface. His desk, chairs, even the floor. The rich smell of strong coffee mixed with old leather law books, creating an atmosphere that screamed serious legal business. "Son, this conspiracy goes deeper than a cattle well in drought season. Sit down before you fall down." He handed me court filings that read like a crime novel. "Dr. Penworth owed Pinnacle Development Group $2.3 million, but the loan terms were structured like something out of The Sopranos. Medical practice as collateral, balloon payment due December 2024, and if he defaulted, Pinnacle could seize everything, including their $1 million Willowbrook mansion." "Now look at this beauty," Gus said, sliding over a consulting agreement that made my jaw drop. Delilah pocketed $15,000 from Pinnacle last year for community development consulting. Translation: professional farm killer. Her job description was written in corporate doublespeak, but the meaning was clear as spring water. Pressure surrounding property owners to sell through harassment, legal intimidation, and bureaucratic warfare. She'd done this dance before. The paper trail told a story uglier than a mud wrestling contest. Patterson family, 89 acres sold after mysterious zoning violations. Rodriguez Ranch, folded under health department complaints and legal bills that would choke a horse. Both properties now sprouted McMansions instead of crops. "But here's where your great-grandfather saves the day from beyond the grave," Gus announced, producing a document so old it practically crumbled at his touch. The 1891 Morrison Ranch deed included something called an agricultural easement clause, language specifically protecting farming operations from development pressure, municipal interference, or forced rezoning. This wasn't just legal protection. It was agricultural armor forged by a man who'd apparently seen the future. "This easement runs deeper than bedrock and supersedes any HOA authority," Gus explained, grinning like he'd struck oil. "Delilah can't force you to sell, can't use eminent domain, can't even petition for zoning changes. Your great-grandfather basically told future land grabbers to go pound sand." The wedding scheme suddenly made perfect sense, like puzzle pieces falling into place during a lightning storm. Delilah needed to establish community use precedent that could challenge my agricultural easement in court. 180 guests enjoying my property would create social media evidence, professional photographs, and witness testimony about public access. "They need to prove your land serves community purposes rather than agricultural ones," Gus continued. "Build enough precedent and they could argue your easement is invalid due to changed use patterns." But here's where Delilah's corporate law background failed her. The agricultural easement specifically anticipated this exact scenario. Any attempt to establish non-agricultural use through trespassing would actually strengthen my legal position rather than weaken it. "So, if I document tomorrow's trespassing," I began. "You prove they're attempting to subvert agricultural protection laws," Gus finished. "And trespassing on protected agricultural land carries penalties up to $1,000 per person. Times 180 wedding guests equals serious money." The timeline crystallized like ice forming on a pond. Dr. Penworth's balloon payment came due 3 months after the wedding. Morrison Ranch sale profits would cover his debt and save his medical practice. If I refused to sell, he'd lose everything. "They're cornered, Jake, and cornered animals do desperate things. Tomorrow morning, let them hang themselves with their own rope." I drove home through darkness that felt less threatening than it had in months. The taste of victory was already sweet on my tongue. Tomorrow, the hunters would become the hunted. Saturday morning at 4 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Earl. "Coffee's on. Time to teach some city folks about farm life." I found him in his kitchen, already dressed in his cleanest overalls and wearing a grin that could have powered the county fairgrounds. The rich aroma of bacon and strong coffee filled the air, the smell of old soldiers preparing for their finest hour. "Jake, I've been waiting 73 years to stick it to people like this Delilah woman," he said, pouring coffee black enough to dissolve horseshoes. "Today, we remind these development vultures what happens when they mess with working folks." Our strategy session felt like D-Day planning, if D-Day featured elderly Vietnam veterans and vintage farm equipment instead of Allied forces and landing craft. First priority, legal ammunition. Gus had spent Friday evening crafting what he called the nuclear option: pre-filed restraining order paperwork, individual trespassing complaint forms for each expected wedding guest, and ironclad documentation proving my agricultural easement trumped any claims Delilah could manufacture. "The beauty is that everything you're planning is not only legal, it's your constitutional right," Gus explained over speakerphone. "Scheduled manure spreading is standard agricultural practice, protected under right-to-farm laws that predate her precious subdivision by 6 decades. Let them try to stop a farmer from farming his own land." Earl's contribution was pure tactical genius wrapped in diesel fuel and rural wisdom. His vintage John Deere manure spreader held 2,000 gallons of the finest organic fertilizer this side of creation. More importantly, it was loud enough to wake hibernating bears and aromatic enough to clear sinuses in 3 counties. "Nothing illegal about improving my pasture on Saturday morning," Earl chuckled, firing up the ancient beast for a test run. The diesel engine roared to life with a sound like Thor's own chainsaw, sending every bird within a mile radius into panicked evacuation. Our community response was more impressive than a barn raising. Giuseppe from Romano's volunteered to cater breakfast for Morrison Ranch supporters. Maria from the farmers market pledged her entire Saturday setup for a solidarity sale. The county extension agent offered to conduct an impromptu, sustainable agriculture demonstration right in my front pasture. "These corporate types think they can bulldoze working people," Giuseppe said, loading his truck with enough pastries to feed a church revival. "They picked the wrong farmer to mess with. You've got more friends than you realize." The media angle crystallized perfectly. Jim Hawkins from the county paper had covered rural development conflicts for 2 decades, and our story hit every note that made his editor's heart sing. Family legacy versus corporate greed, David against Goliath, and small-town values under siege. "I'll be there at sunrise with camera and notebook," he promised. "This story writes itself, especially with your documentation of their harassment campaign. Corporate bullies love darkness but hate sunlight." My security system upgrade was worthy of a federal investigation. Thanks to Bob's Electronics, whose grandfather had shared fence lines with my dad, I had motion-activated cameras with cloud storage positioned at every property entrance. Every trespasser would be documented in high-definition detail, creating evidence that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Technical preparation revealed the fortress strength of my position. GPS surveying confirmed I owned 15 feet beyond the disputed fence line, meaning Delilah had been trespassing during her property inspections. Fresh soil testing proved 0 contamination, making my organic certification more bulletproof than a bank vault. Earl's timing was agricultural poetry in motion. Manure spreading for premium pasture fertilization was scheduled for exactly 6 a.m., perfectly legal, environmentally beneficial, and coincidentally synchronized with wedding setup arrival. The delicious irony was that this harassment-inspired fertilization would boost my organic tomato yields, turning Delilah's vendetta into profitable farming. "Son, I learned something crucial in Vietnam," Earl said, adjusting spreader pressure settings with surgical precision. "Sometimes the best weapon is simply doing your job while watching enemies destroy themselves through their own stupidity." Financial protection was titanium strong. Agricultural tax exemptions shielded me from nuisance penalties, while liability insurance specifically covered normal farming operations, including Saturday morning manure spreading, regardless of neighbor complaints. Every legal base covered, every angle protected. By midnight Friday, our defense network included 6 neighboring farmers offering early morning livestock consultations, 3 restaurant owners providing breakfast for supporters, 1 newspaper reporter documenting everything, and enough legal firepower to stop a corporate land grab colder than January in Alaska. The perfect detail was Sheriff Thompson's patrol adjustment. He'd be conducting routine morning security checks in rural areas, which coincidentally included Morrison Ranch around 7 a.m. pure happenstance naturally. As dawn approached, I stood on my porch watching eastern sky lighten over land 4 generations of Morrisons had defended. The gentle sounds of awakening cattle, Earl's diesel engine warming up like a mechanical rooster, and crisp morning air filled with infinite possibilities. Delilah Penworth thought she was bringing 180 wedding guests to claim my family's legacy. What she was actually delivering was 180 witnesses to the most spectacular corporate faceplant in county history. Time to farm. Thursday night, I was reviewing security footage when I caught the performance of a lifetime. Delilah Penworth, suburban crime boss, creeping through my property at 11:47 p.m. with bolt cutters and the stealth skills of a rhinoceros in stilettos. The footage was better than Saturday Night Live. This woman, who probably hadn't walked on actual dirt since the Bush administration, was stumbling through cow patties in designer sneakers, trying to cut my fence locks while checking her phone every 30 seconds, like she was expecting an Uber. She managed to snap one padlock before my motion lights triggered, illuminating her like she was auditioning for America's Dumbest Criminals. The look of pure terror on her face when those LEDs blazed to life, absolutely priceless. She dropped the bolt cutters, her wedding planning notebook, and probably her dignity, then sprinted back to her BMW faster than a scalded cat. I called Sheriff Thompson immediately, trying not to laugh too hard. "Sheriff, I've got high-definition video of someone playing Midnight Locksmith on my property. Want to come see the show?" By Friday morning, I had official police reports documenting Delilah's suburban spy mission. The abandoned bolt cutters carried her fingerprints like a business card, and the dropped notebook was pure gold. Hand-drawn property maps with notes about optimal photo locations and crowd flow management, criminal trespassing, attempted vandalism, and possession of burglary tools. Not exactly the charges you want on your record when you're trying to maintain credibility as an HOA president, but Delilah's desperation was just getting started. Around 8 a.m. Friday, Dr. Penworth appeared at my door looking like a man whose wife had finally driven him to consider witness protection. Poor guy was sweating through a $1,000 suit, clutching a briefcase like it contained his last shred of sanity. "Mr. Morrison, I need to speak privately," he said, glancing around like the FBI might be watching. "My wife has completely lost her mind about this wedding situation." He opened that briefcase and pulled out $25,000 in cash, real money, sitting on my kitchen table like we were conducting some kind of agricultural drug deal. "This is for weekend use of your property, no questions asked," he said, voice cracking like a teenager asking for his first date. "I know what Delilah's been doing, but she's told 180 people this wedding is happening here, and if it doesn't..." The smell of pure desperation was stronger than my cattle barn in August heat. This man was watching his entire life collapse because his wife had transformed into a corporate land-grabbing monster. "Dr. Penworth, I can't accept this," I said, discreetly starting my phone's voice recorder. "But you need to understand that your wife has been harassing me for months, filing false reports, and now she's committed felony breaking and entering." He broke down completely, like a dam bursting in spring flood. "The balloon payment on our practice loans comes due in December. If we can't help facilitate this land sale to Pinnacle Development, we lose everything. The medical practice, our house, probably our marriage." Bingo, full confession, recorded in high-definition audio. Dr. Penworth had just admitted his wife's entire harassment campaign was designed to force me into selling to developers. After he left with his briefcase of guilt money, Delilah launched her nuclear option, a social media character assassination that would have impressed a political campaign manager. Fake online reviews started appearing faster than weeds after rain. "Morrison Ranch produce gave my family severe food poisoning," screamed one obviously fabricated review. "Unsanitary conditions nearly killed us," claimed another. All posted within minutes of each other, all from accounts created that morning, all written in Delilah's distinctive corporate speak style. My phone started ringing with panicked restaurant owners. 3 establishments called to temporarily suspend orders until these health concerns got resolved. My weekend farmers market income was suddenly in jeopardy. But here's where Delilah's suburban bubble finally burst. She didn't understand that farmers protect their own, and rural communities have longer memories than elephants. Within 2 hours, every farmer in 3 counties knew about the fake review attack. Maria from the farmers market called an emergency vendor meeting, and they voted unanimously to stage Saturday morning's Morrison Ranch Solidarity Sale. "That lying witch thinks she can destroy a good farmer's reputation," Maria said, her voice carrying enough righteous fury to power the county fairgrounds. "We'll show her what real community support looks like." By Friday evening, I had Giuseppe catering breakfast, Maria organizing vendor solidarity, 6 farmers volunteering for livestock consultations, and Earl putting finishing touches on 2,000 gallons of perfectly aged, organically certified, completely legal manure. The rich, earthy aroma of properly composted fertilizer drifted across my property as sunset painted everything golden. To suburban noses, it would smell like disaster. To farmers, it smelled like sweet, sweet justice. Earl, you're an artist with that spreader. Son, tomorrow we teach these city folks what authentic farm experience really means. They want rural atmosphere, we'll give them more authenticity than their designer noses can handle. Game time was 12 hours away. 5:30 a.m. Saturday morning brought the sound of diesel engines and shouting voices that meant D-Day had officially arrived. I watched from my kitchen window as 3 contractor trucks rolled up my driveway like an invading army, loaded with wedding decorations, folding chairs, and enough white fabric to outfit a small circus. Delilah emerged from the lead truck wearing a pink tracksuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, barking orders at workers who looked like they'd rather be cleaning septic tanks. "Set up quickly before that farmer wakes up," she shouted, pointing toward my organic pasture like she was claiming it for the Confederacy. "Everything needs to be perfect before he can interfere." The delicious irony was that I'd been awake since 4 a.m., watching every move through security cameras while sipping coffee that tasted like sweet revenge. 20 workers began installing a wedding arch, arranging chairs for 180 guests, and trampling $15,000 worth of premium organic tomatoes like they were dandelions. I grabbed my camera and started documenting the greatest trespassing exhibition in county history. Each intruder, every damaged plant, all the evidence that would make this the most expensive wedding photo shoot in state legal records. At exactly 6 a.m., Earl's vintage John Deere thundered to life across the pasture like a mechanical deity awakening from slumber. The sound was absolutely magnificent, a deep, throaty rumble that rattled windows 3 counties over and probably registered on seismic equipment. "What is that horrible racket?" Delilah shrieked, spinning around like a pink tornado trying to locate the source of her apocalypse. That horrible racket was the beautiful sound of completely legal agricultural operations beginning precisely on schedule. Earl had positioned his manure spreader in my south pasture, perfectly upwind from the wedding chaos, ready to demonstrate why farmers get up early. The first spray of organic fertilizer caught the morning breeze like nature's own chemical warfare delivery system. The rich, complex aroma of aged cow manure began drifting toward the wedding setup with the precision of a guided missile and the subtlety of a brass band. "Sweet Jesus, what is that smell?" one worker gagged, dropping his box of decorations and sprinting toward his truck like the devil was chasing him. "That's authentic organic farming," I called out cheerfully, strolling across my property with a clipboard and the biggest grin I'd worn since high school graduation. "Saturday morning fertilization. Been on the calendar for months." Delilah charged toward me like a pink rhinoceros, her designer sneakers making obscene squelching sounds through morning-fresh cow patties with each furious step. "You stop that disgusting machine immediately," she demanded, jabbing her finger at Earl like she could somehow boss around a Vietnam veteran operating farm equipment on his own property. "Ma'am, this is standard agricultural practice," I explained with the patience of a kindergarten teacher. "Pasture fertilization happens every Saturday morning. Can't interrupt essential farming operations for unauthorized social events." The timing was pure agricultural poetry. As wedding workers attempted to assemble decorations, the organic bouquet grew stronger with each methodical pass of Earl's spreader. 4 more workers abandoned their posts, fleeing the authentic farm experience faster than tourists from a haunted house. "I'll triple your wages." Delilah screamed at the remaining workers, her voice cracking like thin ice under pressure. "Just finish the damn setup!" But money couldn't overcome basic human biology. The sweet, pungent fragrance of properly aged manure was demonstrating what centuries of farmers knew. Nothing clears unwanted visitors like the honest smell of working agriculture. At 7:30 a.m., Sheriff Thompson arrived for his completely coincidental routine morning patrol, parking his cruiser where he could observe everything unfolding. His timing was purely accidental, just like Earl's fertilization schedule and my decision to begin normal Saturday farm chores. "Morning, Jake," the sheriff called out, stepping carefully around wedding debris scattered across my property like the aftermath of a tornado in a craft store. "Appears you've got some unexpected company." "Yes, sir. Folks seem confused about property ownership and basic trespassing laws," I replied, handing him my meticulously documented evidence. I count 47 unauthorized persons damaging my crops and interfering with agricultural operations. The first actual wedding guests began arriving around 8 a.m. to a scene that looked like a disaster movie directed by someone with a twisted sense of humor. Half-assembled decorations, workers fleeing like refugees, sheriff taking statements, and Earl continuing his masterful fertilization program. "Excuse me, is this the Morrison wedding venue?" a bewildered guest asked, stepping out of his Mercedes and immediately covering his nose with a handkerchief. "No, sir, this is Morrison Ranch, a working agricultural operation," I explained with helpful politeness. "I believe you're looking for a wedding that exists only in someone's imagination." Delilah was making frantic phone calls while standing knee-deep in my organic tomato field, her expensive tracksuit now decorated with mud, manure, and the unmistakable stains of complete desperation. The morning sun climbed higher, intensifying Earl's aromatic masterpiece. More confused guests arrived to chaos, while Delilah's world collapsed one fleeing worker at a time. By 9 a.m., the wedding invasion was imploding spectacularly, and I hadn't even reached the main event yet. By 9 a.m., chaos had evolved into full-scale public theater. Delilah stood knee-deep in my trampled tomato field, surrounded by 180 bewildered wedding guests, half-assembled decorations fluttering in the breeze, and the persistent aromatic reminder of Earl's masterful fertilization program. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced through the rented sound system, her voice pitched higher than a smoke alarm. "There's been a tiny venue misunderstanding, but Brittany's dream wedding will proceed exactly as planned." That's when I decided the curtain was rising on the final act. I walked toward the crowd with Sheriff Thompson, Gus Hendrickson, and Jim Hawkins from the county paper following like a legal strike force. The satisfying crunch of gravel under our boots was the only sound, as 180 pairs of eyes turned to witness what would become county legend. "Folks, I hate to crash this party," I announced, my voice carrying across the pasture with the authority of 4 generations of Morrison determination. "But I'm Jake Morrison, this is Morrison Ranch, and every single one of you is trespassing on my family's land." The collective gasp rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat fields. Guests began noticing the organic tomato plants they'd been trampling, the no trespassing signs posted every 50 feet, and the very obvious fact that they were standing in someone's active farm operation. Delilah lunged for the microphone like a desperate woman grabbing the last lifeboat on the Titanic. "Everyone ignore this man. The venue is confirmed. We have legal documentation." "Ma'am, that's where you're spectacularly wrong," I said, pulling out the 1891 property deed that Gus had preserved like the Declaration of Independence. "This land has belonged to the Morrison family since before your great-grandmother was born, protected by an agricultural easement that makes your little scheme legally impossible." I held the yellowed document high enough for everyone to see. "This easement specifically protects farming operations from exactly what you're attempting, establishing non-agricultural use through organized trespassing." Sheriff Thompson stepped forward, his badge glinting in the morning sun like a symbol of justice finally arriving. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm required to inform you that you're currently trespassing on protected agricultural land. Under state law, this violation carries penalties of up to $1,000 per person." The mathematical reality hit that crowd like a stampede. 180 guests times $1,000 equals $180,000 in potential fines. Cell phones started disappearing into pockets faster than evidence at a crime scene. "This is absolutely ridiculous!" Delilah shrieked, her carefully constructed suburban facade crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. "We have property rights! This is pure harassment!" Gus stepped forward with his briefcase of evidence, looking like a prosecutor about to deliver the death penalty argument. "Let's discuss property rights, Miss Penworth," he said, pulling out documents with the precision of a surgeon. "Here are your husband's loan documents with Pinnacle Development Group. $2.3 million, medical practice as collateral, balloon payment due December 2024. The wedding crowd was dead silent now, riveted by this real-life courtroom drama unfolding in a cow pasture. "And this," Gus continued with devastating calm, "is your consulting agreement with the same development company. $15,000 for facilitating property acquisitions in this area." "Mom, what is he talking about?" Brittany's voice cut through the morning air like broken glass. "You said Mr. Morrison agreed to host my wedding." I pulled out my phone, holding it up like Exhibit A in a murder trial. "And this is yesterday's audio recording of your husband offering me $25,000 to allow this wedding, specifically mentioning how the development company loan depends on forcing me to sell my farm." Dr. Penworth's recorded confession, played through the wedding sound system with the clarity of a death sentence, his voice, desperate and broken, admitting the entire harassment campaign was designed to steal my family's legacy for corporate profit. "You used my wedding as a criminal conspiracy?" Brittany's voice cracked with the sound of a daughter's heart breaking. "You lied to 180 people? You made me an accessory to stealing someone's farm?" The bride turned to face the crowd, tears streaming down her face like rain on a broken window. "I am profoundly sorry," she announced to the assembled guests. "My mother deceived everyone. This wedding was never authorized. We are all trespassing on this good man's property." That's when my community cavalry came charging over the hill. Giuseppe roared up with his catering truck, followed by Maria and 6 farmers market vendors, instantly transforming my front yard into a Save Family Farms festival. "Free breakfast for everyone," Giuseppe announced, courtesy of people who actually support working farmers. Sheriff Thompson approached Delilah with handcuffs that gleamed like justice in the morning sun. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing, harassment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted theft by deception." As those handcuffs clicked shut with the most beautiful sound I'd heard in months, I delivered the line that would be quoted in this county for generations. "Delilah, you picked the wrong farmer to mess with. Morrison land stays Morrison land, whether you like it or not." The entire crowd erupted in applause. The immediate aftermath was sweeter than fresh honey from a county fair. Brittany's wedding got relocated to the county fairgrounds within 2 hours, thanks to Giuseppe's connections in a farming community that proved suburban bullies couldn't destroy genuine human decency. The bride insisted on featuring Morrison Ranch organic produce at her reception, transforming disaster into the most celebrated farm-to-table wedding in county history. Guests couldn't stop raving about those heirloom tomatoes and sweet corn, generating more positive publicity than any marketing budget could have purchased. Legal consequences arrived faster than summer storms. Delilah faced 47 counts of criminal trespassing, plus harassment, forgery, attempted bribery, and conspiracy charges that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Her plea bargain included 2 years probation, 200 hours feeding hungry families at the food bank, and a restraining order keeping her 500 feet from Morrison Ranch forever. The property damage settlement hit harder than hail on a greenhouse roof. $25,000 covered fence repairs, crop replacement, and legal fees, with enough remaining for security upgrades that would protect my farm until Kingdom Come. But the sweetest justice was watching their empire crumble. The HOA dissolved after legal bills exceeded $150,000, leaving Willowbrook Estates without their neighborhood dictator. Dr. Penworth refinanced his medical practice independently, discovering he was actually a decent man once freed from his wife's toxic influence. 3 months later, he became Morrison Ranch's family physician, volunteering at farm safety workshops and admitting he'd learned more about honest work in one morning on my property than 20 years of suburban pretending. The agricultural easement got permanently recorded, creating ironclad protection that would shield Morrison Ranch from corporate vultures until the sun burns out. No development company would ever again threaten 4 generations of family legacy. The real victory was community transformation. Our First Amendment to Farm Festival drew over 500 people celebrating agricultural rights and local food systems. The smell of Giuseppe's grilled vegetables mixed with the laughter of children petting calves, creating memories that connected city folks with rural reality. That festival raised $15,000 for the County Farmers Legal Defense Fund, ensuring other agricultural families would have resources to fight corporate intimidation. Giuseppe opened a permanent farm stand featuring Morrison Ranch produce, while Maria expanded the farmers market to include educational workshops teaching people where food actually comes from. My personal journey surprised everyone, especially myself. Discovering passion for agricultural advocacy led to election to the County Farming Commission, where I now protect small farmers and enforce right-to-farm laws. Speaking at the State Farm Bureau Convention connected me with farmers facing identical harassment across multiple states. The Morrison Ranch Future Farmers Scholarship became my proudest legacy, $10,000 annually for students pursuing agricultural careers, funded by premium organic sales and speaking fees from my growing advocacy work. 5 recipients so far, all passionate about sustainable farming and preserving rural communities for future generations. My YouTube channel, Know Your Farming Rights, reached 50,000 subscribers in 12 months, helping 12 families successfully fight development harassment using strategies they learned from my experience. Weekly messages arrive from rural families who found courage to stand against corporate bullies because one stubborn cattle rancher refused to surrender his heritage. The knowledge I share protects family farms nationwide. Agricultural easements provide stronger legal protection than most people realize. Documentation always defeats harassment campaigns, and state farm bureau organizations offer free legal assistance that too many farmers never discover. Romance bloomed when I least expected it. Sarah Blackwood, the agricultural rights attorney who helped secure victory, shared my passion for farming heritage and social justice. Our spring wedding will happen in the same organic pasture where Delilah's criminal conspiracy collapsed, proving that good land supports good love. Earl still spreads manure every Saturday morning, claiming it's the most satisfying work of his 74 years. The rich, earthy scent of properly composted fertilizer reminds us both that honest work always triumphs over corporate scheming. The morning sun still rises over land my great-grandfather claimed with nothing but determination and faith. 4 generations of Morrison's sweat, tears, and dreams remain safe from those who would steal heritage for profit. Justice tastes like fresh tomatoes ripening in summer heat, sounds like cattle lowing in evening pastures, and feels like soil between fingers that have worked this earth for over a century. Here's my challenge. Share your HOA nightmare stories in the comments below. Let's build a community of people who refuse to let petty tyrants destroy what working families built with their bare hands. Hit that subscribe button for Karen stories, more David versus Goliath justice tales that'll restore your faith in karma and prove the little guy sometimes wins big. Next week, how I caught my city councilman stealing from the volunteer fire department using his own security cameras. Trust me, that takedown will blow your mind.